For a full transcript of this podcast episode, go to the website storiesfrompalestine.info so you can read along. This is Stories from Palestine podcast. Great to have you listening to this very beautiful episode with Izzedine Bukhari from Sacred Cuisine. Last week I said that I will finish the trilogy from Jerusalem to Jaffa today with an episode about Jaffa, but I had planned an interview with a historian from Jaffa on my birthday, and I had just completely forgotten about it when I made the appointment that was going to be my birthday. So I had to reschedule with him, and you will hopefully hear that episode next week. But it was good that I had already recorded this episode with Izzedine. And if you listened to episode 2 of season 2, then you heard Izzedine talking about Sufism in Palestine. This episode is all about food, because that is what Izzedine is very passionate about. The stories behind the local traditional Palestinian food. But before we dive into the greens of Palestine, I would like to thank everyone who reached out to me on my birthday last week, and especially everyone who supported the podcast with a birthday gift through my Ko-fi page or the GoFundMe campaign. It is the only source of income right now, and producing a podcast takes quite a lot of time, and there are several monthly costs that have to be paid for hosting, online recording, and other services. So your support is highly appreciated. You can always find the link to the Ko-fi page in the show notes of the podcast and on the website. So you can pause right now and check that out. Or you can go to the Ko-fi page after you finish listening to this episode, because on the Ko-fi page, there is weekly unique content that you don't find on any other of my social media. And one more thing, this week, I decided to do a little quiz for the listeners. So on the website and on the Facebook and Instagram pages, you will find several photos of some of the greens that Izzedine talks about in this episode. If you can answer the question, what are the names of these plants correctly, then you have a chance to win a Sacred Cuisine spices set that we will ship to you wherever you live. So pay attention during this episode, and now let's talk about greens in Palestine. Hey, Izzedine.
Hello.
Because your sister just got married, you're having family and guests coming over to visit the house?
To visit my sister to see her before she leaves.
So now it's going to be one less in the house.
Yeah, it's just me and my mom now.
Oh, Izzedine. You're the last sheep, but not the lost sheep.
Yeah, hopefully.
Are they asking you now all the time? Oqbal عندك, they say, right?
Oqbal عندك, exactly. I felt everybody had a great opportunity to tell me عقبالك.
Exactly, yeah.
لك خلاص بكفي.
You have the age. So Izzedine, a couple of episodes ago, we talked about Sufism. And in that episode, we also mentioned shortly that you do something in your life. It has to do with food. And that you are running Sacred Cuisine. And we also were talking about how much you can talk about food in Palestine related to the culture, the traditions, the heritage. And right now, it is springtime in Palestine. I have to say that I'm not rather enjoying it because I have hay fever. Stuffed nose, sneezing. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night sneezing, and I have itchy eyes and all of that. I love spring and I hate spring, but it's a great time to go food foraging in Palestine. So I thought let's do an episode completely dedicated to greens in Palestine. But before we jump into the greens, you should tell us more about Sacred Cuisine, because the listeners, I think, really would like to know, what is Sacred Cuisine? How did you get to start with that? What does it do? What does it mean?
So I started Sacred Cuisine in 2017, and my purpose of creating Sacred Cuisine is to basically talk about the origin of vegan food in our culture, which we call Somi. So the purpose of creating Sacred Cuisine was to talk about the Somi food and the roots of vegan in our culture and in our cuisine. And it was just fascinating for me personally to discover the connection of fasting and food. And it's very interesting aspect that through fasting and the philosophy of fasting, I was able to know more about food and understand food and cuisine in general. So this pushed me to create Sacred Cuisine as a vegetarian and vegan company focusing on celebrating these dishes and also talking about the story and the narrative of our culture tied to these ingredients and dishes. And also, as far as the Christian fasting, the Lent, where it play a bigger role in the cuisine, the Christian fasting, it's mean eating vegan, even if you eat meat and even if you eat a product of animals. There is this time which is to break off from these habits as a cleansing time for the body.
So the concept of eating vegan food without using any kind of animal products was what inspired you to start with the Sacred Cuisine. And what does Sacred Cuisine do?
So Sacred Cuisine is a company. It's focused on the pop-up concept. And through the pop-up concept, I do different events, which in each event we talk about different subject, either Somi food or raising awareness about the environment. And also in Sacred Cuisine, beside doing events, I also do food tours where I take people in the old city of Jerusalem and I show them as an eye of a local what the old city of Jerusalem has to offer, from bites to dishes and ingredients.
I remember that you did one of your pop-up activities in my husband's cafe in Beit Sahur in Singer Cafe. And we had a very nice event where you did vegan sushi together with a Japanese woman. She was also a chef. And we talked about how a lot of Palestinians are not aware that most of the food that you eat here is now, there's always a lot of meat and chicken involved, but it can actually be made vegan.
Exactly. And this is what I focus on my work, is how we can, even if there is dishes with meat, how we can still make it with vegetarian.
And when we are talking about vegetarian food, then we are talking about greens also. And you inspired me a couple of weeks ago. You had a post on your Instagram and you were using the green of radish. And now we have a garden. And since actually the corona pandemic started last year, I started planting more things in the garden, which is good. I think a lot of people did that. And one of the things I planted was radish. And I have to say that the greens of my radish are more successful than the radish itself. I think it's because I have a lot of stones in the garden. So they come out really weird shapes. It seems like they are not really able to find space under the ground. So I think I have to learn something about working the ground better. But I had so many greens. So seeing your post, I was so excited to realize that I can actually use all those greens. And I stir fried them with the garlic, and it was really nice. I made them into salad. So that's one of the things that I would like to talk to you about. But let's start about food foraging, because when I started to read a little bit more about eating greens, and we will talk about the different greens that grow in Palestine and what can you cook with them. But the concept of food foraging, where you go into the nature and you just pick whatever you find in the wild, is that something that is traditional here in Palestine?
Absolutely. In Palestine, the land and working in the land allow our ancestor to know and to get introduced to the benefits of many different plants. And the curiosity of our ancestors, it pushed them to try and find what they can use from this plant. And the best example is the loof. The loof, it's basically a plant. When you eat it raw, you will feel with a little bit of numbness in your tongue. And it's because it have ingredient, it can create like a poison. So our ancestors, they figure out by taking this plant and put it in hot water, you will be able to get rid of this ingredient and then it will be safe to eat.
If we were going to go out now in a nature area here around Jerusalem, what are the typical greens that we would find in spring and what would you do with them? Can you just give us a few examples?
Right now, for example, حوارني, our beloved حوارني. It's what's called in English the hedge mustard. It's from the family of mustard. And this family, actually, the mustard family, it's included the radishes, the wasabi, the arugula, even the cabbage and the broccoli and cauliflower. So this family is huge. And the mustard seeds, actually, we know it's coming from the mustard family. But in Palestine, we have over here the hedge mustard that is all around Palestine and what we know it as a حوارني. And we take this plant and we mix it in yogurt and it make one of the most interesting dips, like as a dip with the yogurt. So right now, حوارني is one of the plant that we see in season with a beautiful yellow flower.
I actually went to Batir to record a podcast episode that I still have to edit. And we walked around with somebody from Batir there, Hassan, and he showed me this plant. And then there was a lady there who was selling some of the crops from her own plot of land in Batir. And I bought from her. And then I asked my mother-in-law how to prepare it. And that's what she told me, that I had to mix it with the yogurt and make it into a dip that you can eat it with bread. I cut it up just very small and mix it with the yogurt. Is that correct what I did, or should I have cooked it or baked it before?
No, you don't need to cook it. After you cut it, you put some salt and you let some of that bitterness minimize and let it lose some of that bitterness through the salt. Then you mix it with the yogurt and there is no need to cook it.
Okay, so at least I did that well. Yeah, the taste came out fine, but it was indeed a little bit bitter and pretty sharp. My daughter told me, behrik, yani it's spicy.
Exactly. This is where the salt minimize on that bitterness.
So if you have bitterness, you have to put some salt and you leave it for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And then you kind of squeeze it, get more out of the liquid, give it a wash to lose some of that salt, and then mix it with the yogurt.
Excellent. Very nice. Yeah. And what else? I think that right now I see a lot of khobeze also, or is it already the end of the...
Yeah, khobeze actually one of the most interesting greens that we have in Palestine. And not just in Palestine, worldwide. There is many interesting facts that's come with the khobeze. The khobeze actually, it comes from the family for plant, which include cotton and okra, even hibiscus. And this plant family, it created for us what we call in Palestine khobeze, which known as mallow. But actually, the marshmallow, it's also a plant that's, it is a part of the khobeze family. And worldwide, we know the marshmallow as a candy. But actually, the name marshmallow came to the candy, it's because of the plant itself.
No way.
Mm-hmm. The plant itself, it used as a medicine to treat the sore and the cold throat. So in ancient Egypt, they used to cook the honey with the root of the marshmallow and to thicken out and to get the mucus that's coming out of this root. And this is used to consider as a royal treat and a treatment only for kings. Now, in around the 1800, it got introduced again in our world as a marshmallow of the candy we know. The purpose was to make a medicine for little kids to treat their throat when they have a sore throat. So they took the mucus from the root and they mix it with egg white and sugar and they created the marshmallow that we know today and we love. But the fact that the marshmallow of today does not contain any part of medicine plant and any part of the marshmallow plant, it became more than just a candy. But that's the reason why it was created.
That would have been better if I knew that there was some sort of health benefit to the marshmallows that my kids always want to eat. But right now, I think it's just a whole bunch of sugar.
Exactly. This is how you can see our world is upside down now.
Yeah.
Because this used to be a treatment.
Yeah.
And now it's a pure poison, just sugar.
Yeah, exactly. And in Arabic, it's khobeze. Does it have anything to do with khobiz, which means bread in Arabic?
You know, I heard some saying about the connection of khobeze and the bread, and they say because it's everywhere and there's so much of it, it's like a bread. And actually, during the 4/8, when we lost Palestine, and there was like nobody can leave the house, there was like a curfew, and basically people they didn't have food, so Israelis and Palestinian they used the khobeze to eat at that time.
So you mean that because there was curfews and there was not enough food, they just went foraging and finding in nature the khobeze to cook it? Like my grandmother used to tell me in the Netherlands that when there was the war and at some point there was no food anymore also, in the Second World War I'm talking about, they used to eat flower bulbs. I don't know how nutritious that is, but khobeze is pretty nutritious, right?
It is, and also they don't really try to find it. It's just everywhere to grow viciously. That's why it's even considered a weedy plant, because they think it just does not have any beneficial because it just to grow effortlessly.
So how do you prepare it? How do you eat it?
The best way to eat khubeze is to just saute it with some onion and garlic, garnish it with some sumac. This is one of the ways to use it, just to eat it as a spinach. So this is like one of the most famous way to use it. Other people, they mix it instead of like the za'atar with other pastries and use it as a filling.
Did you ever try to roll like warek dawali with it?
I never tried. I think the leaf is kind of very thin for to roll in. It will bust as the rice or the grain just expand. But I never tried.
Well, that could be something, like a new inventor. But you're right. Maybe you have to wait a bit until the leaf is thicker and then maybe it becomes too much chewy. Hey, and let's say we're still walking around the mountain. We found us some mahwerna and we found some khobeze. But what are other plants or maybe spices or herbs that we would find?
At this time, of course, we will find za'atar, we will find sage, but it's interesting to talk about borage. That's the name for it, I think, in English, which we call it in Arabic wara ilsan, because the leaf, it looked like a tongue. The texture that's come on the leaf, it's like many dots and you can feel it. This is one of the leaf that we roll and we stuff like dawali, grapevine or cabbage leaves. And now it is the season where you see it all over in Palestine. And actually it's a good source for vitamins and fatty acids and vitamin like B6 and B3 and a lot of iron as well.
Greens have lots of iron and vitamin C, right? Also.
Vitamin A, vitamin C, magnesium.
If you went out to buy this or to food forage it, what is the best way to keep it? Can you keep it long? Because usually after you cut something, then, especially leaves, it will quickly change the color or become soft or dry up.
These leaves, because they are more on the thicker side, they kind of hold a bit more. So I would say they will stay like for 3-4 days, especially if you cover them with like a paper towel.
Oh, yeah, that's what I see my mother-in-law do. She puts paper towels also if she stores the mint, the nana, and other herbs, yeah.
I've been experimenting with cooking it as a stir fry, just cut it very thin strips. It's really nice, and even a soup. To mix it with soups.
Oh, nice.
I feel it is like the kale. Like this is our kale in Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. Kale, that's what we have in Holland. And that's what I missed. And I actually, what you're describing now, I found it a few weeks ago on the farmer's market. In Beit Jala, they have a farmer's market and they bring stuff directly from the farmer. And I didn't really know what it was, but it looked like kale to me. So I said, you know what, I'll just buy it. And then somebody told me to sprinkle some olive oil on it and a little bit of salt and put it in the oven for 10-15 minutes. which I did, and it came out crispy as if I was eating vegetable crisps. It was very
You know,
nice.
this is remind me of kale chips, which I used to buy in Whole Food.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you can do all of that yourself. You buy it in a health food store and you buy this healthy food in a plastic bag. But actually, you just have to find your own, greens or slice some vegetables very thin and just bake them in the oven. You can do it yourself. But we usually don't have time. I guess this is the problem.
Exactly.
What about green almonds? When is the time? I mean, I see
Flowers.
I saw the flowers, I saw the blossoms exactly, and now I think it will start growing.
Yes, probably by the mid-end of this month, March, we will start to have the green element.
Can you say something about these green almonds? Because that was the first time I ever ate an almond from a tree that wasn't a nut. I only know almonds. You go to the supermarket and you buy dried nuts. And all of a sudden they give me this green hairy. It's a little bit hairy on the outside. And they're like, oh, yeah, you should just dip it in salt and eat it. It was so strange for me.
You know, this is the season right now of eating green small things with salt. It started from the almond to the cherry to the palm. It's actually a very interesting aspect and a way to utilize the fruits on the different stages in their lifespan. So eating the almonds, everybody eat almond, but the few who eat green almonds,
Yeah.
such as us even as a Palestinian. So this show me the depth of the way how we utilize the land and the fruits. It is not just about using the fruit when it's ready. Also find different way and different experience to consume the plants.
Once I was served green almonds as a mensef. So they made this soup that you make here with the dried yogurt. And so it becomes into kind of a sour, white, thick soup. And then they cook the almonds in it. And so that was kind of maybe the vegan version of men's, I would say.
The vegetarian version, but
oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's not vegan because it has animal products. Yeah, yeah.
But you know, this is a good idea you gave me to make it like completely vegan, because I already made a recipe about the green almond cooked in the yogurt, and it was my first time cooking it and trying it, and it was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the almond is so soft when it's cooked. It melts in your mouth.
Yeah, and what I did, I kind of like give them a little bit of color and a little bit of flavor before I add them to the yogurt.
Oh, how?
I just like saute them before I added the yogurt. And it is a very interesting dish and I really like it. And this is like one of the dishes kind of falling from the table.
Yeah, I guess that there are a lot of things that are not being made anymore. People forgetting about it.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about food foraging, I have another question. I read in an article that Israel's Nature and Parks Authority made a list of species that are protected. And on this list is, for example, also sage and za'atar and akub. And so they say that it's a threat that Palestinians are going around foraging these greens. And especially they were talking about akub. Maybe you can say something about what is your opinion about this, that the Israeli authorities say we are trying to protect these plants because they say that they are in danger, while it is actually part of the Palestinian heritage to forage for these greens.
Actually, what really interesting in this law, that these plants are not in a threat and they are not even closely to be in any kind of, because za'atar and sage, they grow everywhere effortlessly. And you can see the whole idea of this law, it is basically have to do things with the narrative of the Palestinian, especially when you're talking about za'atar. Za'atar is one of our main ingredient it's embedded in the Palestinian lifestyle, not just in the food. And this is like in a way to kind of disconnect the Palestinian from their heritage. And like best example of this law and even the whole creation of the restrict of movement on the Palestinian and the separation wall and the borders to limit the Palestinian from moving around and cultivating the land. And you can see this effect on a tree that's called bottom. Bottom, which is a species of the pistachio tree. And in English it's called Turbineth palestina, and in Latin it's called Pistica palestina. And this tree, it's a big tree, and it grows very small fruit, just like a peppercorn. It's called bottom. And this nut, it used to be part of the ingredient in za'atar blends. When you make the za'atar, this is one of the ingredients you add into the za'atar. And today, most of our za'atar does not include bottom. Just to kind of give you more depth of this tree, all the Arabic gum that we use and we talk about, the mastic, it is coming from the bottom tree. So this tree play a big role in our cuisine, but today, this tree, it's very hard to find its fruits in the market, the bottom, which is you barely can find it. And many people from the culinary world, from the herbal world of today, they don't know about it. And this is very dangerous because this tree play a big role in our ingredients. In the same time, because it's a grow in the wild and we cannot cultivate it because of the structure of the movement, it made this tree to kind of like fallen from our shelves.
So is it then you mean that the tree maybe still exists, but most Palestinians don't have access to them anymore because they are located in areas in the West Bank, for example, where they can't reach?
No, it is still reachable, but of course it's very limited. So it is not like it does not exist anymore. It exists, but it is not cultivated as before. And it's not easy to reach it, which minimize heavily on the amount of bottom in the market.
I know the name of this tree because here in Beit Sofafa there was a big tree that was a bottom tree, and it was behind our house, and it was actually a sacred tree. This is what I heard from Ahmed, who took us on a tour around Beit Sofafa, which is an episode, I think it was episode 3 of this season, where people can listen back to it if they didn't hear it yet. And he told us that, and I know this also from my history classes, is that there were many trees that grew very old and that became very important for the villagers or for the town. Even before that, for the nomads and Bedouins that would be going around, they would refer to a tree because, you know, there was no house addresses yet that you could say, oh, he lives on this and this street. So it'd be like close to this tree. Even from the Bible stories, I remember that Abraham, he went to the great oak tree of Moreh. So they even gave names to these trees. And here there was a big tree that they cut down. I don't remember the reason, but they then built a mosque. And that's why the mosque is also called Botma, because of the sacred tree that was on that location. Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, I read even when we're talking about the Israeli trying to stop people from picking and collecting and foraging in 2014, and I read that in the same article, there was even a 14-year-old boy who was helping his family to forage for some of the greens. He wanted to cross the fence into Israel from the West Bank because he saw a lot of greens on the other side that he wanted to pick. And then he was shot and killed just for food foraging. Imagine.
Yeah, this is the reality that most of our farmers live actually in Palestine. Just to cultivate the land, they can lose their life. But you know, I want to mention how za'atar and sage was dropped by Israel from the list. So it is not anymore on the list as herbs in danger. And I think part of this reason because, you know, as a Palestinian, we talk about this issue as for us to cultivate the za'atar. So I think it added some pressure, which is Israel realized, like we are talking about the herb that's grow easily and effortlessly, and we might sound like a joke.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I planted a small za'atar plant in my garden, and I'm actually every year I have to cut it back because it keeps growing by itself. I did read about akub, which in English is kundilia, that when you want to eat it, you have to eat it basically in an early stage, which I think is always with greens because otherwise the leaves get more hard and they are more chewy and tough. So you have to harvest them basically before they start producing flowers and seeds. And that could be then, of course, if you over forage it, then in the end you may have a reduction of the amount of the plant. And what was interesting in this article, that some scholars think that akub, which is, so people who don't know, they can look it up. It's in English gundilia. It is kind of a thistle and it has a lot of prickles that you will have to remove before you can eat the stem. And they think that maybe this was much available in the time of Jesus, that this was the plant that was used to make the crown of thorns that was put on Jesus' head during the Passion when he walked towards his crucifixion.
Very interesting. I will definitely look it up and search.
So with Sacred Cuisine, that's one of the things you do, right? Is looking for the stories.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look into the stories, how these dishes came to life. What's the reason and what's the narrative behind the dish? And always there's a very interesting story behind it. And the first time I discovered the story of falafel.
Oh, yeah.
It was not easy to discover. I was looking for some information for some time, and I thought the falafel and the hummus shops will give me the answer. So I was asking the owners of hummus shops in the old city of Jerusalem. Even I was in Jordan at that time, and also I asked some people in Jordan about what's the story of hummus and falafel, you know? And people insist that there is no story. But even as a recipe and how it's created, there is like a purpose behind it. It's not just like something happened by mistake to take the bean and soak them and then to grind them without cooking them, but then to deep fry them. So I thought there must be a story behind it and a reason behind it. And when I discovered that's the Coptic of Egypt, it created it because of the Lent and because of the fasting to have something quick, easy, and fast. I was blown away by the beauty of that story and the origin of the falafel, how it is started. And at the same time, how much I was happy and delighted to know the story, I was very devastated to realize how much of falafel we are eating and we consuming on daily basis and how many of us know the story. So I decided to take this history and to expose it to the people, because we are what we eat. But when we know what we eat and where it comes from, we are what we eat and we stand with it with grace. And that's where the story of dishes became one of my main elements in sacred cuisine. And it pushed me into research through ingredient and food. And it is a very blissful path. I can say, that's the way how I approach it.
I also remember learning from you that originally Palestinian dishes were not made with rice. Can you inform our listeners how did it come about that in almost all the Palestinian dishes right now there is rice, but that is pretty new?
Exactly. We in Palestine cultivated the wheat, and we made a different ingredient from the wheat. So, for example, our most famous grain is frike. What is a frike? Frike is basically green wheat that's picked when it's still green and it's fire roasted. And then we have the bulgar, which is basically a wheat that's developed completely, but then we boil it and then we dried it. And then we have jriche, which is just the wheat by itself picked and dried as it is. These are basically our grains. And rice, it was a delicacy that some people can enjoy, and it was very expensive to consume rice and to eat rice. And the reason our cuisine in Palestine is heavily with rice right now, it is because of UNRWA and because of the refugees. And as a Palestinian being moved from their homes and moved to different cities or different country, they became dependent on what the UNRWA provide for food for the refugees.
UNRWA, for listeners who don't know, was the United Nations Relief and Work Agency that was established especially to support Palestinian refugees just after the events in 1948. It was a relief agency, and they brought in the cheap rice to distribute among the refugees.
Correct. And that's the reason we have a lot of rice. And this is how it's interesting, how we went from cooking mjaddara with bulgar to cook it with rice. And when some people, you tell them that's the origin of mjaddara with bulgar, they are shocked. But this is the root.
I'm part of a Facebook group. I think you are too, the Mama's Palestine Kitchen. And there are sometimes people who ask, do you think it's possible, or somebody said that I could cook mjaddara with frika? And I'm like, oh guys, that's how all Palestinian mamas used to cook their mjaddara. But now people think that that may be strange. It should be with rice, but no.
You know, there is an article, I'm a part of it, also Viviane Sansour, which talk about the origin of the Palestinian food. It's written by Yasmin Zahir, and it's a great, well-researched article, talk about the depth of the changes and how it became and the effect of the occupation on the cuisine.
We need to have access to this article. Is it online?
It is, yeah. I will send you the link and you can include it.
Great. I will include it in the show notes of the podcast. Yeah, because we need to know more about the cultural heritage. And I think food is such an important memory of who people are. And you said it, you are what you eat. And this is also culturally, you are what you eat. It's part of your traditions.
Exactly.
We've been talking really a lot about the food tradition, and it's super interesting. We have to bring this episode to an end, but I think that there's one, and let's go back to the greens that we started with. There is one important green that I'm sure all Palestinians all around the world will miss out if we don't mention it, and that is
ملوخية. Is that correct?
Mlochie is the favorite of my children. For me as a foreigner, it's been a little bit hard to get used to it because it's kind of slimy green soup that you eat with rice. But I think it's the favorite dish of many people. Can you say a bit more about the mlochie?
There's many interesting aspects about mlochie. The mlochie, it is part of the mallow family, actually. So it's coming from the Khubbeza family. And in Arabic, we call it mlochie, which they say the name originated from mulukiye, which mean a royalty. And this is very interesting because they said there was a king and he was sick, and his doctor, he asked him to eat mulukhiyya as this was his medicine. So he started to eat mulukhiyya and he fall in love with it, and they say that he kept it for just the royal, and that's why they call it mulukhiyya, because it was eaten just by the royals in Egypt.
Wow. Even now you would say it's kind of the everyday food. So it started off as a royal dish.
Yeah, the name mulukhiyya, it is coming from mulukiyya. Mulukiyya, actually, it's more nutrient than spinach and broccoli. And it's full of vitamins, especially iron. It is rich in iron and calcium. And something actually very interesting I find in a research I was doing about mulukhiyya, that in Japan, there was a student. He was studying in Japan, and he was introduced to the mulukhiyya. And when he moved back to Japan, he started to introduce people and scientists about the mulukhiyya, and they loved it so much, and they created from the mulukhiyya a juice that you can drink. They created the noodles from the mulukhiyya. They used it in creating cosmetic products. Even they made it into supplement pills which you can consume. And I think in 2002 they tried to say mulukhiyya was a Japanese invention.
Oh. Yeah, the food appropriation, I think Palestinians suffer from all the time. Yeah.
I never expect to reach the band, but here we go.
Yeah. By the way, Isidine, did you realize that most Palestinian dishes start with the letter M? Try it.
Wait, I just heard this recently. I think it was on the group. Was it on the group?
I don't know. I remember once somebody telling me this, and since then I've been repeating it to Palestinians, and they all go, maftul, mensef, mjadra, maqluba, مسخن, malfouf. Yeah, they're like, yeah, how did that happen? Mahshi.
That's interesting. I will
look into it.
I don't know what's the connection.
Yeah.
The meme, maybe that's the secret of the recipe.
Yeah.
Just start the name with the meme.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your knowledge and your insight. I know there is so much more to talk about. We didn't even talk about the fact that hummus, before they dry it is also green. And we will also soon see the man sitting in the street with the hummus, and you can buy it and peel it yourself and put it in the oven a little bit. But yeah, there are too many greens to all discuss. But thank you very much.
Yes.
If people want to know more about Sacred Cuisine and what you do, where do they go?
People can go to my website, sacredcuisine.com. I will share the link, but they can follow Instagram for stories about the ingredient in dishes as well.
I will post it in the show notes so they can go there directly and see what you are doing. Definitely follow Sacred Cuisine on Instagram because it's very inspiring. Thank you so much, and we will invite you soon again for another episode on food, because I think it's going to be a favorite topic of many people.
It will be my pleasure as always.
That's it for today, but don't press stop just yet. Remember, you can participate in the quiz. Go to the website storiesfrompalestine.info and find today's episode blog. Scroll down to see the pictures, or go to the Instagram or Facebook page and find the photos there. If you email or message your answers and they are all correct, you have chance to win a beautiful Palestinian spices set prepared for you by Sacred Cuisine. This quiz will be valid until the 1st of April 2021. I will announce the winner in the first week of April. But if you didn't win, or if you are listening to this episode after the 1st of April, then you can still order your own spices set, or tahina set, or dibis set, or the bamboo cutlery set from the Sacred Cuisine online shop. And especially for the listeners of Stories from Palestine podcast, there is a 10% reduction on the price. Sacred Cuisine ships almost everywhere. So go check it out, find the link and the promotion code for the reduction in the show notes on the website or on the Facebook or Instagram, and place your orders. And if you want all of the information that I give you weekly at the end of the podcast in your mailbox, just sign up for the newsletter. Find out how to do that in the show notes of the podcast, and you will receive a weekly email on Monday when the new episode is out. That's it for now. I hope you will tune in again next week.